When you don't take time to look at it through other people's eyes. Take some time and reflect on what you believe in your soul. Cause that is the key to life. You gotta let the negativity go.
Hello and welcome to What the Fox podcast with your two hosts, Lindsey Fox and Amber Ross. As a reminder, today's episode is sponsored by therapyappointment.com. Therapy Appointment is the longest running practice management system out there for therapist by therapist. In addition, we are also sponsored by my coaching business known as conscioushealers.com. If you have any interest in doing any type of empowerment coaching, health coaching, or even getting in touch with a spiritual medium, that's actually a new service that we offer. And I know it's like so bizarre to think of a clinician offering something like that, but I do have a very legitimate person in mind who does this upon request. And so now we have added her to our Conscious Healers community. So check us out. I know it's super exciting. All right, so today's episode is going to be based off of dialectical behavioral therapy tenets, but we're not going to get into all the ins and outs of it. We're just going to talk about one little facet of it, which just kind of came up by happenstance earlier this week. And Amber and I were like, hey, let's talk about
by
this.
happenstance?
Yeah. It was. It was just a real life scenario panned out. And I was like, oh man, this is a moment of willingness versus willfulness. And I had texted Amber about the situation and was like, you know what? This is a good podcast topic. Let's get on there.
And so naturally, I said, heck yeah, it is. Because first of all, I feel like we have to define what does it actually mean to be willful versus what does it actually mean to be willing, right? In day-to-day life. Layman's terms, please.
Totally. Well, first, I actually want to rewind a little bit. And that is just to kind of give an outline of what dialectical behavior therapy is. Because for some people, they might not understand kind of like what the premise is.
Yeah, that's great.
My education and training is as a cognitive behavioral therapist. DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, is a offshoot of CBT. That's a very specified way or approach of working with a very specialized population in need. Typically, borderline personality disorder is where DBT is used. It was developed by Marsha Linehan. And DBT as a whole is really designed to help people who struggle with big emotions and how to help them with like distress tolerance, how to manage really tough emotions and get unstuck when they're in this space of just like really fighting the process.
Yeah.
So willfulness versus willingness is something that comes up as like a learned skill, if you will, that you can add in your toolbox as part of the distress tolerance portion of DBT. And so DBT has a number of different components to it that include, but are not limited to, like distress tolerance skills, mindfulness, interpersonal effectiveness, like different types of communication strategies, that sort of thing.
Okay. And just for the sake of like my brain, right? Distress tolerance, meaning like your response to a stressful situation, your literal, how your body, your mind, everything reacts in a time of stress or distress. Yes?
Correct. Yes. Okay. You hit the nail on the head. And so, distress tolerance sounds maybe like fancy terminology, like fancy clinical jargon, so to speak.
Yeah, you said it and I was like, I think I understand, but hold on.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you clarified that too, because we want our listeners to understand too. And that's the joy of having a therapist and a non-therapist on the podcast, is so that we can kind of break down some of this stuff. So yes, distress tolerance is when it's how to handle distress or just stressful situations as a whole. Yeah. So
important, because I mean, I don't know if everybody else experiences this, but I experience stress on the daily. So being able to walk through that in a healthy way is imperative to myself, to my family, to my job, to every aspect of my life.
Absolutely. And honestly, that's kind of what I like about the DBT model as a whole is like, yes, while it is designed for, a specific diagnosis in mind,
Mm-hmm.
like with a specific diagnosis in mind, I really do believe there's so many parts of DBT that are helpful for everyday people living everyday life with or
Yeah.
without a clinical diagnosis by which it was designed.
Yeah.
So, so then moving to part two of defining these things, willingness is the readiness to enter into and participate in fully living your life and living it fully with a level of willingness. So you're not fighting the process. You are accepting the things that you cannot change, and you are living and being a full participant in your own life.
And this goes back to the idea of flow, which we've discussed a lot, right?
Yes,
And the
ma'am.
idea of focusing on your locus. And, there's
Mm-hmm.
a theme here that in order to live
Yes.
fully, you just have to come to terms with the fact that there are things out of your control and it has to be
Yeah,
okay, which I'll admit is
absolutely.
hase I mean,
It can be very hard.
yeah.
Context always matters. So, yeah, it can be
Mm,
hard as hell depending on what we're talking about. If it's a matter of going with the flow with what's for dinner versus the next 5-year plan of your life.
yeah.
Things
Context
are,
matters.
that's right. And so, with that, I definitely want to get into what willingness versus willfulness is, because I actually remember whenever I was called out for it by another
Oh,
therapist. This is the joy. PS, just it being a therapist, most of my friends are also therapists. And so the joy of having friendships like this is that we call each other on our shit. And I remember distinctly when I was this was within the last 3 years, because I was navigating my divorce
yeah.
process. I can't remember the circumstance, but what I can tell you is that I was being hella willful, not willing.
Okay.
And my friend was kind of like troubleshooting, asking me questions.
As
This is
friends
a
do.
Yes, especially really good therapist friends.
Yeah.
And so and this friend is definitely one where like when I need someone to challenge me because she's just as like ridiculous as I am, she's like my go-to friend of like, let's talk this out, and I need you to challenge me and call me out if you're hearing
Yeah.
some discrepancies. And so we were talking, I was processing out some stuff, and she was like, "Huh, sounds like you're being really willful, Lindsey." And I was like, what does that even mean? Like, what are you actually trying to say to me? And she said, like, you know what you're supposed to do. You understand exactly what you're supposed to do. And you're unwilling to do the thing. And in fact, you're not just unwilling, you're being willfully defiant in not
Ooh,
doing what you know you should be doing, which could help you get unstuck.
I
It's
love
like,
it. So I'm imagining like the willful Lindsey in this case is like has an agenda, has wants things to play out a certain way, and is trying to force the little square peg into the round hole, no matter how many times it's not working, right?
yeah, that's it. That's it. When we try to force and control things that we have no control over, that's the one, Amber. Yeah.
Yeah. I can see that. I mean,
Hmm.
I've experienced that. Obviously, we're talking about real life things. I
Yeah.
think there's probably not anybody on this earth who has not at one point in time been willful in a
Oh my
situation and
gosh. We
wanting
all
something
have.
to go a certain way and just being
Yep.
stubborn as hell, pushing
Yep.
it along, right?
Totally. And, I think there's something to be said for it, because many of us have learned that where there's a will, there's a way.
Well, and persistence pays off.
That's right. That's right. So we've been taught all this bullshit, but I got to tell you, DBT and their approach to like the DBT concepts, um, DBT does not agree with this idea that where there is a will, there is a way, because
Mm,
it's a way of like that expression. In other words, is saying our shortcomings come from a lack of willpower.
yeah.
And so it's like, okay. So there's a DBT training manual I have. Sorry if you can hear all the papers rustling. I don't really have enough space to pull out all the things I want to today. So I'm just going to read off a quickie tidbit here from one of my training manuals with DBT. And I like this little piece about willingness. It says this belief system is the opposite. And this is with regard to like this idea of where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
It says this belief system is the opposite of what DBT teaches. Sometimes we need to exert our will, but often willingness is more effective. With willfulness, our options are limited, whereas with willingness, options to reach goals and solve problems open up through our ability to be creative and flexible. Where there is willingness, there is a way.
I like that. Yeah,
Where
it's
there
a
is
very
willingness.
well, and a willingness to understand that everything doesn't always go according to plan. You know,
Mhm.
everything doesn't have to be your way or the highway. A willingness that something could be beautiful even if you didn't plan it the way that it turned out.
Imagine that, right? My goodness. If only, here's the thing though, and this is what, man, being willful. If only hindsight, right? We talk about the benefit of hindsight being 2020. It's like, well, yeah, of course we can say this about certain things in hindsight. But when we're in it, it is so different. And that's really what DBT is all about, is how to help you when you are actively in that mud and sitting in it. And it talks about why this concept of using willingness versus willfulness works, because willingness aligns us with the realities of a situation rather than pitting ourselves against them. Because fighting in reality or anything rarely creates an effective outcome. So think about the power struggles and how ineffective they can be for everybody involved when you're being willful.
Yeah. No, I think that makes perfect sense. And I'm actually, when you first mentioned this to me, as an idea for a podcast topic, immediately I was like, yes, because this is real life where we can actually make a change, and where there's areas that I still need to work on being more willing and less willful, as far as, in work and in parenting and in relationships. So I am interested. Do you have it like one or two tools or ideas that people can start working on to key into this and actually help themselves become more willing versus more willful, or perhaps things that have helped you over the years?
I mean, I think first things first, it's identifying when you are being willful.
Yeah.
And so to my point of what I was talking about earlier is that I was kind of called out for it. And I was lucky because it was a friend who actually
Yeah.
is a DBT clinician and does this by trade. And she just called me out on it.
Well, and
So,
someone who cared enough to say, hey,
right.
this isn't working. Let's focus in.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's just it, is that sometimes it is hard to get out of our own way in order to see clearly. And, an example, like this week, the reason why this topic even came up this week is because my mom had a surgery scheduled, and she is by far the most stubborn woman I've ever met in my life and the most challenging patient I've ever had to deal with. And just throughout this process of trying to be her caregiver, it has been like pulling teeth to get her to do the most basic things that the doctors are asking her to do.
Yeah.
And, I was sitting with her in the hospital waiting room a couple days ago, and I asked her, like, have you had anything to eat today? No.
That's a good
Oh,
question.
okay.
I like that question.
Yeah, you too like that. You asked me that question, and I appreciate when you ask me that question.
No, but really, so she replied with no, she had not eaten that day.
Yeah, she just has not been abiding by a lot of things that the
Mm,
doctor's been advising. And she's been driving me nuts as a result, because I really want a different outcome for her. And therefore I
yeah.
really wish she'd adhere to the rules, the guidelines, and what she's being advised in order to produce that outcome. So anyway, I looked at her and I just said, why are you being so willful about this process? Why are you being so willful about this?
Yeah.
And she just sat there for a second, and I just was like, I so feel this moment, because I was like, we've all been there. And she
Yeah.
just looked at me and she was like, I don't know, but I've been fighting like hell throughout this whole process. I've been fighting every part of this process. And I said, I know.
You're like, we know, Mom, we know.
But like, can we not though? Because it's really exhausting. It's draining your energy. It's draining my energy. None of us have the energy to put up with this. Like, stop fighting and just go with the flow and be willing to do the things that you can.
Yeah. And honestly, like, I want to take a pause there because something that I have learned about your mother, right? She has always been a fighter. She has always been like a hustler. She has always been very persistent and
Yes.
in the pursuit of what she felt was needed or um, was
Just.
the right thing, right? Or
Mhm.
just, yeah. So it does not
Well,
surprise me that when your health is in question and you're sitting with doctors that she might be resistant to that. And good for you for calling her out though and saying, hey, like this isn't working, we've got to do something different if we want different results.
totally. And I mean, just as a reminder, folks, strong-willed parents produce strong-willed children. So, I mean,
What?
I mean, if I'm going to be this woman's child, of course I'm going to challenge her.
Yeah.
I mean, you got me. It's strong-willed parent produced me, so of course I'm not gonna let her go easy. I'm gonna fight her back, and so
Yeah.
that's really where that conversation, right there in the hospital waiting room, took place. Is me talking about willfulness and willingness, and I felt like it was just a repeat of that very incident that took place with me a few years back with my friend.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's how we got there for today. What was your question that you had asked previously?
So we were talking about helpful tools to allow people to become more willing in their life. And you mentioned that step one was keying into areas where you are being willful instead of willing, right?
Yeah,
And
the
focusing in
awareness.
on always awareness is first because you can't fix
Yep.
something if you don't know that it's broken um,
Hmm.
or if you don't know where to begin.
Yeah. So you can keep track of the numbers of one, two, three, A, B, C, because my brain can't remember all this. So I'm just going to shoot from the hip, because that's just like that's how my brain works. I can't keep up.
Yeah.
But I would say, so fine. If I'm saying step two, or the next logical step is
Yep.
then, if you're cueing in and having that sense of self-awareness of like, okay, I am being pretty damn willful right now. I would say the next thing is taking a non-judgmental stance about your emotions,
Okay.
because emotions are not good or bad. They're
Yeah.
not right or wrong. Our emotions are not good, bad, right, or wrong. They are morally neutral. They just exist. They actually just kind of guide us in understanding how to connect with people.
Yeah.
So, and how to kind of like make meaning of a situation or a person, place, or thing. I mean, emotions are just there kind of like as a factual representation of where we are in that moment of time.
Yeah. And this is, I mean, if I can summarize it maybe in a different way, it's understanding what emotion is causing you to be willful. Is that right? So, like, once you've identified I'm being willful / stubborn in this area, what emotion is causing that behavior? Or what am I feeling? What am I sensing that's causing me to push back or to fight in this area? Is that fair?
I think it could be, but I also am not good at lumping all things in one category, which is why
Okay.
I don't do get the cat. I can't. I struggle with that piece. But because of my cognitive behavioral brain, I'm like, well, it's not just emotions. I feel like there's a situation or event that then triggers a thought process or processes that undergo, and then that influences an emotion, which then drives our behavior. Um, So while emotions kind of link and connect with our, stems to our motivation and how we show up, so do our thoughts, and so do the events prior, as
Yeah.
well as our foundational experiences and interpretations of those events and situations. So if you're being re-triggered because of a past trauma, um, and maybe the emotion is actually a reminder of that past trauma,
Right.
but it actually is not. The emotion is linked to a trigger rather than the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
That's where I feel like some of that feelingness of being willful can, or the action of being willful can kind of pop in, and you start to get really stuck because you're responding to something that actually is not in line with the true nature of the situation. You're
Yeah.
fighting it.
I think that makes perfect sense. And I love the way that you explain that. So thank you for taking the time to do that. And I believe for me comes back to the non-judgmental approach, right? Because when we start to judge those emotions, like we're aware of a situation, we pull in the emotions and we start to approach them with judgment, we're not judging the right thing. I mean, there's no basis in reality that that's a foundation that exists, if that makes sense. So we become aware, we identify some emotions without judgment, and then what do we do with that information?
Well, I think it's a matter of understanding. Again, all of this stuff keeps coming back to mindfulness. All this stuff keeps coming back to self-awareness, mindfulness, and getting a grip of those things and how they all kind of interconnect. And so I think this is where the reframe comes in. So replacing willfulness with willingness and understanding what is within your control to do that. So, understanding that willingness is doing just what is needed in each situation, wholeheartedly, without dragging your feet, without creating a list of excuses as to why it won't work and fighting it tooth and nail. And understanding that willingness is listening very, very carefully to your logical mind, not your emotional mind. Because that is when things kind of get very confusing, is whenever we are making decisions from a reactive space rather than looking at all the facts for what they are and letting the data guide our decision making.
I agree. And I want to take a pause because I heard someone tell me this, and it might have been you in the past couple of years, was that you really should avoid making big decisions when you're in an emotional high or an emotional low, because we're not making decisions from that logical part of our brain. And this could be a decision, big or small, it impacts your life in some way. But when we're at those extreme points, whether they be high or low, it's very hard to make a conscious, logical decision on how to move forward.
Right. Yes,
and it's really
was,
like that. It was probably you, honestly.
It was, because there was a number of things going on at that time, and there were some big decisions, and still are some big decisions that I had been contemplating and how to move forward with things, and just talking it out. It was like, you know what? I understand this is not the time for me to make these really big decisions.
Yeah.
Got to do baby steps. Because when we are in a state of heightened emotion, again, if we're thinking through, and I don't mean to make this all about like a trauma lens, but maintaining the perspective that, number one, I'm a trauma therapist, and number two, DBT was designed for individuals with borderline personality disorder, and those individuals tend to have extensive childhood traumas.
Right.
And so with that in mind, it's not a good decision to make to make a bunch of big changes in your life, just like how they talk about, and I can't list them off again. I don't do well with lists unless it's like right in front of me. But in terms of like getting married, getting divorced, someone passing away, buying a house, like you really being exposed to these major life events and having more than one or two in a year, you need to let yourself have some time to digest and process all that, whether it's changing a job, moving, you name it.
Well, and I think like that's the big scale, right? So those are the big life decisions, big life moments. But this also, as we mentioned already earlier in this episode, is relevant in day-to-day living. Like I think of stressful situations with managing my emotions as well as the emotions of my children. And I'm doing some work to learn about conscious parenting and co-regulation techniques and all of the things to help all of us manage our stress responses a little healthier or in a healthier manner, right?
Right.
And so when I think about this, I think of it on that scale, not necessarily, a major life decision, but honestly, day to day, your kid doesn't want to eat what you cooked for dinner. Like, how do we handle this situation when they're now screaming in your face about whatever food you've put? Like, that is a stressful situation that creates a stress response, and I can choose to be willing or willful in my response to them and how I show up as a parent. Right. So I think we can go all the way from top to bottom in how this relates to people's day-to-day lives, or I mean, for that matter, Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, absolutely. This is why I was saying initially, like, while this kind of concept is linked to one, clinical intervention style, it is absolutely applicable toward day-to-day life. And if I will tell you, I just came across a 5 step-by-step piece around willingness, if you would like to hear it. So there are very rigid step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go for it.
So number 1, observe the willfulness, label it, experience it. Number 2, radically accept that at this moment you feel and may be acting willful. You cannot fight willfulness with willfulness. Number 3, turn your mind toward acceptance and willingness. Number 4, try half smiling and a willing posture. I'll come back to that one.
Okay.
Step 5, when willfulness is immovable, ask, what's the threat?
That's really important.
Yeah, because again, that's where, if we're, I'm speaking more from a trauma lens, but when your amygdala has hijacked and your prefrontal cortex is shut off, you're not thinking with your rational mind. You're thinking with your primal survival brain, and it's not making much sense.
Yeah. Do we fight or do we run? Right. And that is not necessarily what needs to happen, either one. Right. It's like
there might not be an actual threat. Right. There might not be a threat present. And that's why that check-in is really, really important, for sure.
Absolutely. I'm glad you found that list. And I'd love to dig into number 4, because the half smile and the willing posture threw me for a loop there when you said it.
These are the kind of things that it's been nice through this podcast to kind of revisit some of this stuff, because this is all stuff that I've learned and had training on, but it's so like natural in my behind the scenes brain that I forget that these are things that need to be labeled and discussed out loud. So actually I'm glad to kind of talk it out. So the half smiling technique is one where you want to relax your face from the top of your head down to your chin and your jaw. Just kind of relax all your facial muscles, and let go of all the muscles in your forehead and your brows and your cheeks. Allow your tongue to just sit instead of holding it. So you're releasing, right? You're allowing your face to even feel vulnerable, because when we're willful, our muscles are tense. We're fighting, right? And so every bit of us is trying to fight the process, and it shows. So a tense smile is a grin, whereas that's where your brain is kind of communicating that you're hiding something or masking your real feelings. Whereas when you kind of let both corners of your lips go slightly up, and you can just fill them ever so slightly, it's not necessary for people to see it, but it's a little half smile. It's a gentle, calm half smile with a relaxed face. And it's you learning to adopt a serene facial expression. So it communicates, your facial expressions are then communicating to your brain and your body, which is connected because your mind and body are all connected.
What?
You're communicating to your body, you're safe, it's okay, I am open, I am willing. Yeah. And so that half smile is actually a really good little tidbit trick that you can try when you find yourself in that fighting willfulness state.
It's a great mindfulness practice, right? And it's one method that can be successful in addition to breath work. And the emphasis on posture, I love, because I am one of those people that I tense up. Even when I take a big breath, my whole body goes up instead of my body going out, because of how I carry my tension and my stress. And it's something I've been made aware of very recently. And it's something I'm working on, because I'm like, oh, this is cool. I can have an impact on this, and I can help my body's stress response by just being aware of those not a stress trigger, but how my body
Your muscle
reacts in those
movements.
situations. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it affects our, so that's just it. The mind body connection, it's all connected, but particularly with your vagus nerve. And
Mm-hmm.
so that all you're communicating whether or not you are feeling stressed to your brain and vice versa. Because there's like that conditioning that has taken place, that muscle memory, if you will, that has taken place. And so, um, we can unlearn those things by creating new practices. And so the posturing and having willing hands even is something that can help communicate to your mind and body, I am safe. There is no threat. It is okay. So even placing your hands on your lap, uncrossing your arms, kind of letting your shoulders just sort of relax, unclench your, if maybe you have your fist balled up. I know a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people tend to have their fists balled up. They have no idea. They have no
Oh,
awareness that their fists are
interesting.
even balled up. Maybe it's just like, or they're fidgeting or constantly wringing their hands. They have no idea until you're kind of labeling it and say, "Hey, I notice you're holding your hands pretty tightly right there. What's going on?"
Yeah. No, that's a
And so,
great call out. And it goes back to the awareness of what your body is feeling and what your body is experiencing and like
yeah.
how you're communicating with yourself. And I think, when we started this conversation in my mind, being willful or willing is
Hmm.
an outward projection of how am I communicating with the world? Where now we've gotten to the end of it, and it's very much how am I communicating with myself, because that colors everything else and it impacts everything else.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
And it's also what's in my control.
yes, it is within your control. It's about focusing on your locus of control,
Hmm.
100%. And so, honestly, I think a good practice for those of y'all who are interested in kind of like getting yourself in this new rhythm or just adopting, we've talked about SMART goals and how taking small little incremental steps day by day or week by week, month by month can actually produce lasting change. So, even having a small little goal of beginning each morning with a half smile
Mm,
is actually one that you're training your body instead of saying, you know, that you're going to get up and run and start the day and it's just go, 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 go. You're actually just going to pause, allow everything to be relaxed,
yeah.
and just allow a gentle half smile to wash over your face, allow your muscles to be relaxed, be present in that moment, and then start your day.
And then go do the things.
Yeah. And so, and also, doing that and checking in with yourself during your free moments when you have time, like, or just whatever. You could be, walking from your office uh, desk to the bathroom in that short little 3 to 5 second
Hmm.
walk. You can just check in with yourself around that. Um, just any little moments like that of mindfulness actually go a really long way.
I agree. I mean, I routinely check in with myself by figuring out, hey, unclench your jaw, drop your
Mhm.
shoulders,
Yeah.
like relax your face. And I didn't think of it the way that you did with the half smile. That's something that I'll add in because I haven't really made it that far in the reflection of self, but just
Yeah.
the act of, a couple of times a day saying, okay, let's take a deep breath. Let's relax our shoulders, unclench our jaw, and then move on to the next thing. Because what I've found is as we move from task to task, we carry the stress, we carry the emotion, we carry all of the things. And by the end of the day, it's all sitting on our shoulders,
Mm.
sitting on our back, weighing us down, and everything feels so heavy. Whereas if we
Literally.
take literally,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I could
Yeah.
be hunched over by the end of the day from the weight of the
Mhm.
stress and not even realize it.
Yeah.
Where if I take small stretch breaks or small relax breaks or small
Mhm.
breathing breaks, like these are all ways that you can work to lighten that load so that by the time
Absolutely.
you get to the end of the day, you're not just completely zonked.
Mhm. Yeah. And this is why I talked about this in a episode that we had with the guest speaker Victoria about finances, is like I have a fixed self-care budget every month where
Yeah.
I allot for things to ensure that I am practicing that mindfulness or allowing myself to really be present with just me, because I do wear a lot of different hats, as a therapist, as a business owner, as a caregiver, and a lot of other things. So it's like having that time is so valuable. And even just last night, I went to the float tank where it's like, um, for those of y'all who have never been, it's 10 inches of water with 1,000 pounds of Epsom salts. And you just float in a sensory deprivation tank and just chill.
And it's amazing. Whoever gave you the idea to go there is just smart.
Well, I've been wanting to go for a while. There's a place in Grafton, Massachusetts, and I remember this woman, Julie, owns a spa, and she said, "Lindsey, I'm getting a float tank." And this is whenever I was doing my public health work, and she said, "You have got to check it out once you guys give the permit or whatever," which wasn't my job. That's a different entity, a board of health, but and I was like, "Well, I'd love to check it out." So she gave me a whole tour of the spa, and I was like, "Oh man, this is amazing!"
It's amazing. It truly. Eric and I experienced it for the first time probably 3 years ago. And at first I was really nervous and for those who don't know, Eric is my husband. We did a date night and like went to dinner, did a kid free, and then like we did this float tank spa experience. And the silence and the no lights and just being there with the water and floating. I mean, I don't think you can do it justice trying to tell people how incredibly freeing and relaxing that, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, however long you spend in there. I came out of the float tank a different person because there was no stress. There was no sound. It was just like, I got to exist in my own brain for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, no, it's a very beautiful experience. And I will say it is not for everyone.
No.
It is not for everyone. But with all of that salt, it's really pulling away that lactic acid away from our muscles so that when we're getting out, that's why our body, that tension is just kind of like, it's like floating away. It's like just releasing. But yes, it's not for everyone in the sense that some people like to have lights on or off, but it's a sensory deprivation tank. It originated in our society for different purposes, not for relaxation. Not sure how aware people are of that, but they've been used in our military to kind of solicit information
I was not
people.
aware of that.
Yes,
I can see how that. Yeah, I can see how that would work.
Yeah, it's very disorienting experience if you do not know what you're doing and where you're going and whenever it's pitch black. So frankly, it is one of those things that you kind of need to take some trauma informed precautions before going and learning about it. But all that being said, highly recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness. We went off on a little bit of a tangent, but another self-care tool for sure. And I love that you prioritize your self-care in your budget, because I think when we take care of ourselves well, we're able to do all of the things we want to do, all of the things we need to do. And that's that has been a huge shift in my mindset over the last probably 4 or 5 years, because it is easy to put yourself on the back burner, and it is extraordinarily important to make sure your needs are getting met by yourself first before you look for them elsewhere. Right.
Yeah. And that's honestly something I see so often, which is, I mean, just even as in the space as a therapist and as a coach, but this is really why I felt like I had that calling to start doing retreats, to host retreats, because I find that more often than not, women in particular struggle so much to give themselves permission to just have that space, create the space for their own care, or to create a budget for their self-care. That is absolutely a mindset shift.
Yep.
But once you're able to get through and break through that barrier of that mindset shift, there's a lot of power in being able to give yourself permission to reset and to recharge, to retreat, and to give yourself permission to just get regrounded. It's a really beautiful thing. So it's certainly something I'd like to support women with doing.
Absolutely. And I'm right there with you. I could not agree more, my friend, which surprises me not at all. This was a truly fun conversation, sharing about willfulness, willingness, how we can make small changes each day in creating a more willing attitude and willing approach to our challenges and our stressors. I think ultimately sets us up for success in enjoying the life we get to live. I'm not saying success in a dollar amount or, a status symbol. Literally being able to live your life in a way that sparks joy and brings a smile to your face instead of walking through life with gritted teeth and just bearing the burden of everything on your shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, that's where I would say my final little tidbit is I always encourage people the power of affirmations and internal dialogue. We didn't really get into it much in today's episode, but there's significant research to show that it really does help. And so even if you are starting your day with that half smile and an affirmation on your mirror or on your phone, it can actually go quite a long way.
Yeah. And do you want to give us, I know we're closing, but I'd love to give maybe 2 affirmations that come to mind when you say that. So while you're thinking, I'm going to relax my face, I'm going to do this half smile, I'm going to approach my day willfully. Do you have an affirmation to share to get people started? Because I think sometimes that can be a stumbling block.
Well, mine are very unique to my personal experience at this time. I do believe starting with like I am is a helpful starting point. I am, fill in your blank, or it could just be I am. Um, so I don't really have a specific go-to one that I recommend to people. I have a number of them posted on my Instagram account for those who would like to go to Lindsey the Life Coach on Instagram. But do I have one off the top of my head? Absolutely not, because there's honestly thousands of them.
I was gonna say there's absolute millions, but
like I can tell you one, for example, like for my divorce process, I kept Post-its throughout my entire house and like key parts of my house or door, like whenever entryways or mirrors or whatever, that said, let me think how I phrased it. It was something like, I will not wait for my divorce to finalize in order to start living my life.
I am not waiting for my divorce to finalize, I think is what, because I remember seeing it and thinking, yes, Lindsey, that's it. That's the attitude. And you keyed on exactly what I was looking for. It's the I am, and it's that present tense. It's because when we put it just a shift from I am or I will, being in that present moment, I am choosing to do this thing right now. I am not waiting for anything else. This is how I'm choosing to approach my day. That, I believe, is the most important part of selecting an affirmation.
That was actually huge for me. That particular affirmation is the one that really clicked and resonated for me because I really had spent so much time waiting that my whole mindset and the way that I was talking was very centrally focused on like, well, when this happens, then I'll blah, blah, blah. And it was like, no, no, no. And I'd like to say, call out to my personal therapist who helped me with that reframe because it was a really powerful one. It's one thing being in my chair supporting others, but it's really nice when I can have that, accountability with someone I trust to kind of know my situation, say, hey, this is your affirmation. So that was a good one for me. But I do think there's a lot of power with I am and tailoring it to whatever your personal situation is.
Yep. And journaling helps, brain dumps help, figuring out where you're stuck and what you want to move. That will lead you to the affirmation that's going to resonate with you. Absolutely.
Absolutely. For sure. There's so much extra that I kind of want to dive into. I know that we're kind of limited. The last little thing that I want to label with what you're commenting on is this idea or concept of opposite action, which is also a DBT component, which is really doing the opposite of what your emotion's telling you to do.
Oh, okay.
So opposite action is like, if you're sitting in that space of reactivity and it's a really intense emotion that's certainly not serving you because it's causing you to be willful. Opposite action is about saying, do the opposite of that reactive emotion and use your wise mind, use your logical brain to make that decision and do that action.
That's a great call
that's
out.
Just like that's just a one little tidbit that I would say to help remember how to get unstuck. That would be one.
Amazing. Thank you, Lindsey. You just have brought so many tidbits and so many helpful areas through this whole conversation. So I hope, and I know that the listeners are receiving that with open minds and open hearts, and that this is going to be put to good use. So thank you. I appreciate you coming up with the topic and
And so it is. That's right. All right, y'all. It's always a pleasure connecting with you guys. We really would love to connect with you more on our social media platforms. We love hearing from our listeners and just want to say thank you so much to each and every single one of you who take time out of your busy weeks to tune in and listen to us every week. It really means a lot. We would love to hear you. Feel free to put comments on our videos on YouTube at What the Fox Podcast, or you can tune in to Spotify, Apple. We love those 5-star reviews because it boosts us in the algorithm. So please keep those coming too. Thanks, y'all. We'll see you next Tuesday.
Bye, y'all.
And we all sing, everything is gonna be just fine. It's gonna fall into place. The sun is gonna set on your terrible day.